Today's video is brought to you by the letter S because I'm sheepishly sharing my slacker sewing tips for a straight skirt. Hey everybody, it's me, Margaret, and Matilda, who will be modeling for you today. We are from Mississippi, transplanted to Atlanta, Georgia, where we sheepishly share things we love with you. And today, what we're sharing is this pattern that I have had for 100 years. It's a new look pattern and the number is 6843. Like I said, I've had it forever, like over 10 years. It's still on sale today because all it is a bunch of classic skirts. I showed this in one of my regular sheepishly sharing videos and I had several people say, tell us more about the shortcuts that you take when you make this skirt, because while I basically follow this pattern, there are a bunch of shortcuts that I take and some improvements too that I make to this skirt, and I have made it a billion times. These are some that I have made years ago that I still wear on a regular basis. I've made improvements over the years and I just keep using the same pattern over and over again. Just last year, I bought this skirt from Talbot's, and it's regularly a $70 skirt. Of course, I got it on sale for like 70% off. And as I got to looking at it, I thought, oh my word, this is pretty much the same skirt that I modified from that original pattern. The only difference is that there is a side zip instead of a back zip. So let me walk you through that. Now I think it's important to note that this is not exactly a sewing tutorial. This is an explanation of the modifications that I make to this pattern for a really quick and easy skirt that I think turned out great. So looking at the pattern real quick, it's a new look and the number is 6843. You need to get the size that fits you, and I'm working on view C, which is the straight skirt. But basically what I'm showing you can be applied to any of the views that you like. Now the pattern for this skirt basically just includes a front and a back and a waistband. And I don't use the waistband, so you're dealing with two pieces. Now as far as supplies go, I use all the regular stuff that you would need, you know, like scissors and pins, always a seam ripper because you make mistakes, marking, something to mark with, whatever your favorite things are. I usually just use a pencil or a marker. Now I do have a washable marker, you know, the kind that's like temporary, invisible ink. It lasts for only so long and then it just kind of air dries and disappears, but I can't find it. This is a Sharpie. Most people would cringe and freak out, but remember, I'm a slacker sewer. I also, on occasion, will use a rotary cutter because that can be like really quick when you're doing several layers at one time. So that's just something to consider, but certainly not necessary. And speaking of not necessary, here are my things that I consider icing on the cake. This is a basting spray. It is spray and bond, basting adhesive is what it's called. I'll put a link in the description box below where you can get some of this stuff. And I love it for various reasons. It will hold two pieces of fabric together for you if you don't want to pin it, because sometimes pinning will buckle your fabric and it may be awkward. But another really cool use for it is this. You can literally spray your pattern pieces and it will stick to the paper. It pulls off, and when it dries, it's not sticky. It's finished. It does the job, and then it doesn't hurt your pattern or anything. But it keeps it lying flat, where I've noticed sometimes when you pin, it buckles the fabric, and if you go to cut, it may not give you a nice perfect edge. And number one tip is always cut your pattern out as perfectly as you can, because you're using the raw edges as your guide when you're sewing. So you want them to be as straight as possible. Now another thing that I find indispensable is this stuff. It's called Wonder Tape. And I use it for zipper application. It's actually a two-sided tape that I'll show you up close when we go to use it, that will not gum up your needle and it washes away. Really neat stuff. It's also great for tricky curves or something like that, which we don't have in this skirt, but lots of uses for this Wonder Tape. And I'll put a link in the description box below for that too. And this is plain old painter's tape. It's a low-tack tape that does not leave any sticky residue, and I use this for marking seam allowances or sewing lines if I need it, depending upon the pattern. I don't use it on this pattern, but I'll show you how you can. Now, the big question I kept getting over and over again is, what kind of fabric is this? This is a quilting cotton, and you have plenty of patterns to choose from out there. That's why I love it. It's also light. I live in the South. It gets hot down here. But quilting cotton is very thin, so I want mine to have more body, if you will. So I always, not really line it, but I double it. So look for another cotton. In this case, this is an old sheet, and that was in good condition, mind you. And what I do is, when I cut these out, I just put the cotton on top of the sheet or lining fabric that I'm going to use, and then put the pattern down and cut it out. So I'm cutting out 2 and 1, and I treat the 2 fabrics as one fabric. The fabric in this Talbot skirt is more of a canvas-like material. It's just a little bit heavier. It's not, it says canvas, but it's not stiff like a canvas. I don't know. But anyway, I feel better when I wear a skirt with a little weight to it than one that's too thin. So I've cut out my 2 pieces, and now I need to mark my dart. Now, it would be great if I had some tracing paper and a rotary wheel. I have the rotary wheel, but I don't have any paper. So I'm going to have to make do. And this is how I do it. All right, so this is all going to be encased in the seam allowance, right? So I'll take a good marker that has a lot of bleed, and I'm going to mark in right on the edge where the top of this dart goes. And because it's going to be in the seam allowance, it's never going to show, right? So we're good. We can mark right there. So I've put a pin right here to mark the point of the dart for my size. And I write on the pattern right here. I don't hesitate to mark things up because it makes it easier for me, especially if I've made the skirt before and I've learned an adjustment that I want to make. I write all over the pattern. So I mark the point of that dart. Now, remembering that I'm treating the 2 fabrics as one, the lining will be my wrong side. So I'll need to mark the point of the dart on the wrong side of the fabric, aka the lining. If you're a beginner, I would encourage you to clip any notches or anything like that. I've done this so many times, I don't bother. This is the only thing that I mark are the darts, and that's another slacker sewing tip. Then you grab the skirt backs and repeat the process, noticing that there are 2 darts on this pattern piece. Mark the top of each dart, and then of course remember to do the points. And here I switch to a marker because it's easier, and it'll never be seen because it's on the inside. So I lay out the skirt front, and I notice the prominent crease and a few wrinkles, so I give it a quick press. Okay, it's ironed. So now I'm going to treat these 2 pieces as one from now on. So let me line them up exactly as they were cut. And I have 2 pieces. Now here's a trick that I use that professional sewers would never use, and that is I'm going to mark my stitching lines right here on my fabric. This serves 2 purposes for me. One, I'll make sure I get a nice straight dart, because if your dart is not sewn straight, it will pucker. But before that, it's going to make it easier to pin. So now I can match my marks, right sides together, and I can envision exactly what I'm going to see once it's sewn. Then, using a straight stitch, you follow your stitching line and make your dart, being sure to back stitch at the beginning and end. I think the darts are very important because they're what give the nice shaping to the pencil skirt. I'm trying to show you in this shot that I start at the point of the dart just off the fabric and move up the dart. This gives me a nice sharp point with no pucker. takes care of the 2 darts on the skirt front. Now we continue with the 2 skirt back pieces, and remember that each of those have 2 darts apiece. Now, if you just can't bring yourself to mark on your fabric, you can use painter's tape to mark your seam line. Place it just to the right of the sewing line and use it as a guide. Now over at the ironing board, I clip my threads, I press those flat, then I open the skirt, pressing the darts toward the center and being careful to iron all parts of the dart as flat as possible so you'll have a nice curved fit. I skipped the initial stay stitching step because this is a nice tight woven, but right now I'm going to pretend to stay stitch across like this from the outside to the inside, and that'll hold down the darts as well. And through the magic of editing, we'll just knock that right out. Do the first half, clip, flip it around, going from the outside to the inside. And it's done. Then you should have 2 back pieces, the front piece darts sewn down, pressed nicely. You have some nice, neat darts. Alright, now it's time to fit that zipper and sew the center back seam closed. So here's how I do it. I pin the back all the way down from top to bottom, being careful to align the pieces just right. And you're going to look for that mark that indicates where the zipper ends. Now make sure you can see it because you're based from the top to that mark and then regular stitch all the way down. Ooh, kind of dark. Let me lighten it up. There. We're going to increase our stitch from a regular 2.5 up to a 4.5 for basting. So we're going to use that long basting stitch to baste from the top edge down to the mark. And when we get to the mark, we need to reduce our stitch length to a respectable 2.5 and continue down to the bottom edge of the skirt. Back to the ironing board to set your stitches and press your seam open. And use an adequate zipper from the bargain zipper collection. Okay, so putting in the zipper, here's my method. Take it out of the package and get some of your handy dandy Wonder tape. All this is a 2-sided tape that will wash out. And I put it all along the side of my zipper. Along the right side, the front side of my zipper. Actually, I like it to be really close to the edge like I did right there, so I'm going to move this right here. Okay, and then you peel off the second layer of paper, which is much easier said than done. Kind of have to scrape it off of the paper and hold it down with your thumbnail. And then you take the zipper and place it face down over the seam, over the basting seam. And here's what I like to do. I pick it up and lay it down right on that seam and press as I go. Now you've got it lying nice and flat without having to pin it. I thought this was going to be such a great angle, but I was so wrong. Alright, so I'll just have to tell you what's happening. Alright, I have a zipper foot on here and I'm sewing down the right side of the zipper as close to the far edge as I can get. And when I get past the end of the zipper, I'm going to leave my needle in the fabric, lift up the presser foot and turn, and then I'm going to sew across the bottom part of the zipper. But I actually will sew forward, then backward, then forward again. Then after that little reinforcement maneuver, I make sure the needle is back in the fabric. I turn and I'm coming up the other side of the zipper as close to the outer edge of that zipper tape as possible. And here's a close-up view of what the finished product looks like on the outside. So it came out pretty good. I have been known to have to rip it out and do it again, but it's okay because it's just a zipper. Now, in order to move the zipper, we have to get rid of those basting stitches that are holding the back seam together. So just take a seam ripper and go right up the path of the zipper. Then get rid of all those little loose threads, give it a press, and you're ready to move on. Time to sew the side seams. Place right sides together, carefully aligning the side edges and pin. I like to sew from top down, so I keep this in mind when deciding where to place my pins. So I'll flip it over, pin the other side, and then take it to the machine. And you know what sewing straight seams looks like, so pretend you watched the whole thing, and here we are finishing up the second seam. Press, press, press. The one thing you could do that makes your garment look finished is to have proper, good pressing. So finish up both of those seams as you're supposed to with that iron. Now remember, we're substituting a simple hem for a waistband. So at this point, we'll finish both the top and the bottom edges with a zigzag. This prevents raveling and allows us to simply fold over once and hem, thus reducing bulkiness. Now, while I'm snipping off loose threads, I want to talk about seam finishes for just a minute. If you are a very conscientious sewer and not a slacker sewer, you'll want to finish your seams, whether that means if you're lucky enough to have a serger, you know, you could serge your seams instead of just straight stitch. You can zigzag these edges or whatever, but I don't worry about that. It doesn't do anything to safeguard your fabric. I mean, it may ravel, but after so many years, it stops. Proof, I'll show you the inside of this skirt. Now, this skirt is 10 years old or so, and these edges were pinked, and while that is supposed to stop fraying, it does fray a little bit, and you can see how it's so fuzzy right here. But it doesn't matter, and you can't see it through the skirt. It doesn't add bulk or anything like that, so I'll just pink those and call it a day. And I know a lot of people are really concerned with how it looks on the inside, and okay, you know, that's a valid point, I guess, but you know, who's looking at the inside of your clothes? I mean, where the heck are you taking your clothes off? Now, I don't have a serger, but you see this number 11 right here? That is my favorite way to do seams, and quite frankly, I don't know why I didn't demonstrate that this time. I guess I was just trying to do things basically, but this is a great thing to do. It gives you a straight stitch, but it also gives you a zigzag, and then you trim right next to it. Let me show you an example of that. This is an example of that stitch after years of wear, and you can see it, you know, it kind of copies what a serger does. It fills the bill, does what you need to. You just have to be really careful when you're trimming not to clip any of those zigzags. Now, looking at hems, this one, you can maybe see that right there. I did this on a machine, it's a machine hemming stitch, and that's the way I did this. It's kind of a pain in the neck to do because you have to be so very careful. This one is just machine stitched. I finished the edge with a zigzag, as I just did with our skirt we're working on here, and then that's just a straight machine stitch. I mean, as long as your thread blends, what does it matter? This khaki one is, oh, that came from the Bass Company. That's a Bass skirt. This one is an Ann Taylor loft skirt, and both of these are machine hemmed. And then this one is a Talbot skirt, which does appear to have like a, I mean, I'm sure it was done by machine, but you can't see it at all. So this would have to be hand stitched to replicate a look like this. But it's pretty much, you know, finished with a serger on the inside, and then let's just say it was hand stitched. So I think that however you want to finish the hem is fine. So I've just been finishing mine with machine hems, and I just don't think it's a problem. A straight stitch right under there. Now with a straight stitch, what I'm going to do is merely fold this down and stitch all around it. And that way we'll end up with a top that looks like this. And I'll do the same thing with the hem. I'll just decide where I want it, flip it up, and sew with a straight stitch. And that's that. And here's the finished waist. And here's the hem that I ended up with. And I think it looks fine. So here's the finished project. I think it looks fine on the outside, which of course is the part that everybody is going to see. And that's the most important thing. So if I didn't have to film this, I could have knocked this out in under an hour after cutting, not counting the cutting. It's a pretty quick process. And that answers your questions on how I modify that new look pattern. Hope it helped. Bye.